goods and services, social and economic disruption, and environmental damage. Oh my. They're natural or human-made. So the earthquake is natural. The chemical spill is human-made. We can look at those, and they have the potential to adversely affect human health, property, and its potential energy. That the energy, if the energy is released in some way, it's potentially going to affect the human population, our environment, our economics, etc. And these are some of the hazards. The hazards are either natural or human-made, and sometimes they're both, or a combination of them. They're either natural or human-made. So the natural ones can be classified. Are they geophysical, such as in earthquakes, tsunamis? Are they related to climate? Are they related to things that happen out in space? Are they related to water? Are they related to biologicals? So we're talking about infection here as well. Human-made, sometimes called anthropogenic, maybe from technology. And we know that we've got stored chemicals and we work with chemicals. We know we have unstable structures such as nuclear material. We have unexploded bombs in places. And we have transport issues because this stuff is being carried through our communities and we don't even know what's in those trucks and trailers. And if one of those things tips over and has chemicals on board, and then there's the whole issue of conflict. And the conflict, for example, that was going on in Aceh at the time of the earthquake and tsunami. We know that had a significant impact on the ability of Aceh to deal with it. And then there's natural plus human. Most of these are health related. Unimportant that way, but a hazard is a danger, something that's a danger to you. An event, and this is a biggie because the event is something that happens or takes place. The earthquake is an event. It is caused by a collision of seismic plates. That's the hazard. So an earthquake is an event. The tsunami was an event. It's an occurrence that has the potential, has the potential to injure and affect living beings, the environment. And the actualization of a hazard, it could be primary or it could be secondary. What's the difference? The earthquake for the tsunami, the earthquake that generated the tsunami was the primary event from the seismic plate, collision of the seismic plates. The plates collided, lifted the ocean floor, that lifted the water above it, and that created the tsunami, which was a secondary event. There were two events, the earthquake and the tsunami. Number one, number two, without the earthquake there would have been no tsunami. And so we look at primary and secondary events, and when we look at the geophysical ones, we're talking about an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, which you now also have in the area. So those are important geophysical ones. Climatological, wind, precipitation, wildfires, temperature extremes, drought, desertification, floods, avalanches, tsunamis. This is kind of the typology that we're talking about. Storms, and then epidemics, and then insect infestations, etc. So these are events. They're not hazards, and they are not disasters. They are not disasters, they are events. One of the things we want to know is how many events turn into a disaster? That's something we would like to be aware of anyway. So when we look at technological events, we can say that, well, there's material that gets released, there may have cracked a trailer overturn, collapse and failure of a business, of a building, explosions, fire. And there's conflict. We know about conflict, armed and unarmed. That's sanctions and embargo, which many countries are now doing to Iran. And then we have mixed ones of landslide that may be caused by removing the vegetation from the hillside or from an epidemic, etc. So we have an idea. So just to make sure that you understand the difference, this is a hazard, right? By the way, this is snow. Okay, just if you haven't seen it before. And would you agree that this is an event now because the volcano erupts? So that's a little difference. I don't think this guy would want to be sitting here when this was going on. So There's several characteristics of an event. And the reason I put these up here, because this will be on your exam at 12 o'clock. I'm joking with you. And when we describe an event, what was the onset like? How long did it last? How big was it? Was it 10 meters high, the tsunami? What was the intensity over time? How big of an area did it cover? What was the absolute amount of energy? And was it a large-scale event or a small-scale event? These are important in terms of description. The only reason I put this up here for you is when you read the next report on a disaster, think about whether they've adequately described the event or not. Do you really know from what you read what happened? And what was the cause of the problem? And so that becomes significant, and then we can look at the onset, for example, sudden, gradual, slow. I personally don't like this classification, but it's usually used. So sudden onset is seconds to hours. Well, I think the sudden onset of an earthquake is pretty short, without much warning. Gradual is over days or weeks, such as with a typhoon. Slow is months to years, such as famine. And then we can look at how long they lasted, brief, seconds, hours. Hours is a long time. It's short, intermediate, so days to weeks, and then prolonged, and then we can classify many of the events according to this. So when you read next time, you go back and you think about what Marv said, and then you say, oh, that thing, I don't know what that's all about, because it's not adequately described. Because they just described, what you see is an earthquake of magnitude, which is a wrong term, by the Richter scale of 7.2, right? That's what you read about. What about all these other factors that relate? So event characteristics, I'm not going into each of these, but the event is the event. It's what happens because the hazard is activated and something happens. And something may cause damage to structure. So it may knock down buildings, it may knock over poles, it may destroy the shoreline, it can have all kinds of structural impact. The collapse of buildings may occur. So we're talking about structural damage. And that's the physical disruption. And that's related to the energy released during an event. Humans and other living beings, to the human-built structures, and to our environment. And it may impair the value or usefulness of something. So we see that there's several different ways that we can look at structural damage. And we often see this. One of the interesting things about structural damage, and I don't think I included the slide, was if you look at the damage in Aceh, the temples, mosques, remained standing and everything around them was flattened. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? What was different between the structure used in the building of the mosque versus the structure that was used in the businesses and the residents that were around it? We're going to have to look at that as we go on. And so here's a tornado that came very close to my hometown and Elaine's hometown. About 20 miles from Madison, this was a tornado. You can see it coming, and this is the damage that occurred. These are homes. So if you look at it, went through this path and just flattened everything there, that's structural damage. The question is, could people function, and could we continue to function? If this was a hospital, would that hospital be able to deliver services? Because what's really important in terms of health is that the hospital medical facilities can continue to operate. And so we have to think about safe hospitals. If this event is coming along, what can we do to the hospital to allow it to survive and to allow it to continue to deliver the services that people need? So that's one of the reasons people have a hard time getting health care. And for example, we don't know how many people make it to the medical facility that may not be there anymore and then go on to die. We don't know that. But we need to know that. So the event, this is this guy here, and this is the damage, this is the lava coming down the hill, but it stopped right here because it recognized the stop sign. Right? That was very nice that it did that. Structural damage may cause functional damage. Functional damage means if there's physical damage, how much did that impair our ability to function? Because what's really important is how well we can function. Can we function in spite of the damage? Can we continue to deliver